I'm going to be introducing our keynote speaker, Mike Richardson, but a little background information on him. He's a Vistage speaker. He's part of our Speakers Bureau, pretty typical of our Speakers Bureau. In fact, how many Vistage members out there, if you could raise your hand, have heard Mike Richardson in your Vistage group meeting? And are back for more, great. So this is actually my Vistage group meeting, and we just decided to invite 400 of our closest friends. And my members will be continuing this afternoon at our afternoon location for our executive session. And remember, on the back of your name tag, where you're going for lunch if you've signed up for that. So Mike Richardson, he's a principal with Agility Consulting and Training in San Diego, considered to be the premier consulting firm helping global leaders and organizations develop an enterprise agility advantage. He's a nationally and internationally renowned speaker, having presented to more than 3,000 CEOs and senior executives globally. Mike's British, but having been here 20 years, he's an American citizen now. He has 35 years in the oil and gas, aerospace, and automotive industries, an MBA from London Business School, and he's a thought-leading expert on agility. He's the author of Wheelspin, the Agility Executive's Manifesto, and he's working on his next book, Cracking the Agility Code, the Pivot to Agile Principles for Non-Agile Leaders. Mike's here to help us pivot by giving us an update on the Agile movement across all industries and all businesses, working with startups to global corporations, high-tech to low-tech, software to manufacturing, new economy to old economy, for-profit, not-for-profit, all are experiencing the same agility challenge. In the midst of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, are you agile or fragile? Please join me in welcoming Mike Richardson.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. So by a show of hands, who out there has heard of this thing that's been around for a while called Agile Software Development? Who's heard of that? We'll call that less than 50%. We're going to do a deep dive into this whole Agile thing today. And we're going to be in the business of myth busting. There's some important myths that we need to bust today. We're going to answer all of these questions so you understand what Agile is and what it isn't. And by the way, I'm sort of stuck in a twilight zone called the Mid-Atlantic, right? I'm so confused about tomato, agile, but you'll be able to track along, won't you? We're going to be in the business of busting some myths. Most people think that Agile is for software companies and software teams only. Completely, 100% wrong. Most people think that Agile started with software companies and software teams. 100% wrong. Most people think that smaller companies, small to medium-sized businesses, mid-market companies, startups are naturally agile. 100% wrong. They're not naturally agile, they're naturally what? Frenetic. Hair on fire, seat of the pants. We're going to get into all of this. Most people think on the flip side, of course, that most large companies are naturally not agile. And yes, the majority of large corporations are naturally bureaucratic, but actually, as you'll see, there is an increasing minority of large corporations, public companies, who are making the pivot to Agile. And I'll give you some case studies today. Most people think, oh, isn't this Agile thing just spin, it's fashion, it's a new fad, it's basically old stuff repackaged. We'll try to bust that myth for you. And then last but not least, this one's more subtle. We already do, fill in the blank, I don't know, balanced scorecard, OKRs, objectives and key result areas that Google pioneered. Lean Six Sigma. Whatever is already going through your mind, well, hang on a minute, we already do key performance indicators, measures of performance metrics. We already do that, so we don't need to do this Agile thing, right? If that's already going through your mind, I hope to bust that myth with you today. Here's where we're going to go. We're going to start out with understanding why Agile. Why are all businesses and all industries looking at pivoting to Agile? Why is that? And why should you too? This is where we're headed. And it really starts from this thing called VUCA. Now, those of you that have heard me speak in your groups, you've heard me go through this a little bit, but I need everybody to get this. There are some important acronyms out there in the Agile space. I'm not a big fan of acronyms, but they're out there, and you need to know about them. One of the most famous is this one called VUCA. If you go to the search field of your favorite business magazine, Inc. magazine, there's a few copies on the back table back there, Fast Company, Harvard Business Review. If that's your thing, right? If you go there and you type in VUCA in the search field, you'll be buried. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And by the way, this file, a PDF of this file, is already waiting for you at a link that I'll be giving you later, where, by the way, there are a bunch of downloadable templates and tools that you can have at as you see fit. So please take some notes if you like as we go along, but this whole thing is waiting for you as a PDF at that link later on. Would you agree with me we live in an increasingly VUCA world? Increasingly volatile, increasingly uncertain, increasingly complex, increasingly ambiguous. Don't get me started about political VUCA. Not just here, but also in the UK with Brexit and other places in Europe and around the world as I travel around, everybody's immersed in political VUCA. Now there's two flavors of VUCA. There's the external stuff, like remember when we rolled out the railroad infrastructure? That was VUCA. The freeway infrastructure was VUCA on the railroad infrastructure. The aviation infrastructure was VUCA on the freeway infrastructure. The internet infrastructure was VUCA on the aviation infrastructure. Social media, and look at the volatility we've experienced in the stock markets recently. Not least of all now, there is this thing called the Volatility Index, the VIX. We actively measure the volatility of the stock markets recently, and who knows when we're going to see the next big correction. That's going to create some VUCA. And Alan Bolio, who was here last year, has been educating us about when the next economic VUCA is going to come. These are all examples of how we live in an increasingly time-compressed world. We live in a world of accelerated obsolescence. All of that stuff is the external VUCA that we experience. But you all also experience internal VUCA, don't you? I have a millennial son. He's 27 years old now. He graduated 4 years ago, and he's working with his fourth technology company. He's in inside sales, his fourth technology company in 4 years. And just before he leaves, each time he calls me up. He never used to call me up, did he? As a teenager, he didn't give a rat what I thought about anything, did he? But now he cares, doesn't he? And he calls me up just before he leaves. He said, "Dad," it's a short conversation typically, "Dad, I'm thinking of leaving." Okay, how come? Well, because the leadership here sucks. They don't care about me. It's not a terribly meaningful place to work. I don't get the purpose and the passion. And just because he knows I'm in the field, right? I don't think they're agile. The leadership here sucks. It's not agile, it's fragile. That's the question I'm here to ask you today. Are you agile or are you fragile? Are you allowing internal VUCA inside of your company? Are you part of that internal VUCA inside of your company? Are you managing and anticipating external VUCA outside of your company? And how are you going to be agile in the face of all of that? That's what we're here to explore today. I invited you, as you RSVP'd, I invited you to participate in this thing called the VUCA report, and 53 of you did. We've surveyed about 1,300 executives and CEOs so far globally. And one of the most important questions we ask is, what's your estimate of the future VUCA that we're going to experience? 0 if you think much less, to 100 if you think much more. And typically we're around that 70% mark. 70% of the respondents think in the future we're going to experience much more VUCA, much more quickly, much more volatility. And you came in just a little shy of that, the 53 of you that participated, 67.23, but you're right there in the same zone. You all anticipate that we're going to experience much more VUCA in the future, coming at us thicker and faster than ever before. We asked you for the top 10 disruptive trends that you're experiencing. You're on the left, and the other participants on the right. Same kind of stuff, economic cycles and recession, cybersecurity, of course, is a big one. Increasing demands upon you as leaders to be agile. The influence of government, of course. Anybody check Twitter this morning? What's happening? Collaboration tools to facilitate the technology platform for agility. The predictive analytics, consumer analytics, business analytics, inflation, of course. Leveraging big data. Difference in working styles across the generations. There's my son, okay, my millennial son. And, of course, interest rates, etc. So all of this disruptive stuff coming at you. As we ask you, how agile are you? You're on the left. These are the 15 parameters that it takes to be incredibly agile. I noticed something interesting. On the right-hand side, it's usually decision-making that has the lowest score, and indeed it does on the right-hand side. Now keep in mind that many of these respondents are larger corporations, and that is the biggest challenge that larger bureaucratic corporations have, and they'll articulate it as our decision-making isn't agile enough. It's not iterative enough, it's not fast enough. You put that a little further down the list on yours. It's item number 6. And it may be that that is a sign of some misinterpretation of what it is to be agile. And we'll explore that as we go forward here. But these are the 15 categories that you need to be agile, and then the key words that come up when we did this exercise: decision-making, of course, training, meetings. We're going to talk about meetings later. Culture, team, strategic were big words. And then obstacles, generational stuff, younger people like my son. That's all in the handout when you go and get it. And it tees us up beautifully for where we're headed today. This agility challenge, this agility solution is elusive for most people. And McKinsey did a great study recently in October last year. And here's what they said. We live in this VUCA world of rapid changes and competition, demand, technology, and regulations. The ability to quickly reconfigure strategy, structure, processes, people, and technology. That's what Agile is. And it's elusive for most. They estimate only 22% of organizations. Now keep in mind that McKinsey will tend to study larger corporations, often public, so they can analyze their share price and look at the winners and the losers and all of that good stuff. So this really is a reflection of larger corporations. Now notice though that the previous study where they did the same thing 2 years prior said only 12%. So there is an increasing minority of even large corporations and global public companies who are figuring out this pivot to Agile, and I'm going to invite you to as well. You know, 160, 170 years ago, he called it right, didn't he? It's not the strongest who survive. It's not the smartest who survive. It's the most adaptable to change. I can't tell you the number of times in working with startups and global companies, people will say to me, but Mike, you don't understand, we have a really strong platform for this. Or we have really smart people in our R&D department. I'm glad that you do. I'm really glad that you do. But that's not the point, is it? How adaptable are you going to be to this VUCA disruptive flow of change that's coming at us thicker and faster than ever before? That's the key. So in the face of these VUCA challenges, here's the definition of agility. It is essentially the ability to adapt to these rapidly changing circumstances, VUCA, while staying ahead of the other guys, your competition, outrunning the competition, and staying ahead of the expectations that your different stakeholder groups have of you. Your customers clearly, so you get to keep the best ones. Your employees, so you get to keep the best ones. Your vendors, so that you get to keep the best ones. And your shareholders and your debt holders, so you get to keep the best ones. and you don't get that phone call from the bank at just the wrong moment saying we need to talk and potentially we're calling your loan. So how do you stay ahead of the expectations of your various categories of stakeholder, and how do you stay ahead of the competition in this VUCA, accelerating VUCA world in which we live? That's what we're here to explore. Now, those of you that have been in the Agile space, you know that there's this other word out there. Who's heard of this word called waterfall? Yes, waterfall is now used by Agile leaders to describe the old traditional way of doing business. It's now called waterfall. If we were to map out the traditional approach to the project management of something complex, we'd put together this grand master plan. It would have stages and gates and budgets and requirements and specifications, right? And eventually down here, there's the big bang day when we flick the switch. We call that waterfall. And waterfall is a very linear process. It's very sequential, stages and gates. We figure out where that critical path is, right, to this big bang day. It's all about avoiding failure, okay? How do we map this out so we've thought of everything to avoid failure? And it's a very slow cycle, therefore. We hardly iterate at all. We're going to get it right first time, and it's going to be beautiful. On Big Bang Day, when we flick the switch, it's going to be glorious. Who's not had that experience? Who's had a different experience to that? That's why the Agile movement grew up. Because what we realized was, in an increasingly VUCA world, waterfall doesn't work well anymore. We need something much more iterative. That's where Agile came from. Agile is circular. It is iterative. It's not about critical path, it's about critical learning. It's not about avoiding failure, it's about embracing failure. See, what Agile people recognize is you cannot do anything complex without experiencing failure, period. So get on with it. Embrace it. Now, that's not an excuse for stupid failure, dumb failure, repeated failure. What were you guys thinking failure? It's not an excuse for that. It's got to be smart failure, because when it's smart failure, it's not failure, is it? It's what? Learning. This is the mindset shift to Agile on the right-hand side. And therefore, Agile is fast cycle, not slow cycle. This is the difference between Agile and waterfall. In an increasingly VUCA world, if you default back to waterfall, in an increasingly VUCA world, a time-compressed world of accelerated obsolescence, the odds are stacked against you. You are prone to failure. If you can lean into Agile in ways that I'm going to help you understand, the odds are stacked for you. Probability of success. In other words, don't live in the fragile majority. Live in the agile minority. And that's the invitation that I'm going to throw out to you today. I'm going to invite you, more than you already do, to move from the fragile majority to the agile minority. That's what I'm going to invite you to do. And therefore, at the bottom line, I'm really here to inspire you, hopefully, to become students of agility. That's all I can do today. I'm going to give you a few actions to get started, to get the ball rolling, to get on that on-ramp to a more agile future. But in the space of an hour or two today, I can't give you the PhD in agility, can I? But I can maybe invite you to flick a switch up here and just decide, I'm going to become a student of agility, because I recognize that every industry, every business, every CEO and executive's future in this room pivots upon agility more than you realize. And that's what I'm here to try to convince you of today. Some people ask, well, why us? Isn't this just for software companies and IT companies, and isn't it just for startups? Well, no, there's a secret history of agile innovation where actually it didn't start with software companies, it didn't start with startups. The whole agile movement started with corporations, not startups, hardware companies, not software companies. And it all started actually back in 1986 when two Japanese authors, one of whom's last name is Takeuchi, he's still very big in this space, he publishes pretty much every year in the Harvard Business Review. They wrote this article called The New Product Development Game back in 1986. And they studied hardware companies, photocopier manufacturers, camera manufacturers, car manufacturers. And what they noticed is that these companies had moved on from the old way of doing product development, which in this article they called the relay race approach, waterfall, right? We pass the baton, pass the baton, pass the baton, pass the baton, pass the baton. So they noticed they'd moved on from the old way of doing product development, relay race, waterfall, to the new product development game that they said, well, it's more like rugby. The team is passing the ball backwards and forwards amongst itself dynamically, moving down the field as a unit. And for the very first time ever in that 1986 article studying hardware corporations, they coined the agile phrase of Scrum. The rugby analogy of Scrum. And those of you that have remotely been in the agile space know that at a 100,000-foot conceptual level, agile and Scrum are somewhat interchangeable. Scrum has a very practical meaning on a day-to-day basis, which we will get to. But at a 100,000-foot conceptual level, agile and Scrum are largely interchangeable. And it came out of a 1986 article studying hardware corporations, not software startups. So that's the first myth busted. Scrum is not the most structured thing in the world, is it? Scrum is not the least structured thing in the world. Scrum is a bit messy, pushing and pulling. I want you to keep that in mind, that analogy of a scrum, because that's where we're headed here, to really understand what Agile is. Agile is not the most structured thing in the world. It's not the least structured thing in the world. It's a little bit messy. But there's power in that messiness. I want you to remember that, okay? So it all came from this 1986 article studying hardware corporations. A great book written in 1994 with 100 examples of companies who were going agile. Not least of all, some big hardware companies like Boeing and Harley-Davidson. In 2003, there was an article written about, not least of all, Saab. I'm going to talk about Saab later. And then in 2016, one of those authors that wrote that 1986 article, he published again. And the article was called Embracing Agile. And again, some hardware companies in the mix, not least of all GE. We'll talk about GE later, but Jeff Immelt, who's subsequently been fired from GE, or rather took early retirement. And by the way, did you notice in the news yesterday, his replacement just got fired? John Flannery, right, who was wheeled out as the savior of GE, just got fired yesterday. Okay? Oh, and by the way, in between times, GE just got booted out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average Index, having been one of the original components of that index and had been in that index continuously for more than 100 years, just got booted out. We'll talk a little bit about why. But GE, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, Jeff Immelt woke up to the fact that GE was too lean. Lean, Six Sigma, statistical process control, right? Does anybody in the room do formal lean? Formal. Yes, sir, over there. Of course, I come from the aerospace business and the oil and gas business. We do formal lean, otherwise really bad stuff happens really fast, really big, with no second chances, right? And I see a nodding head over there. Who in the room does semi-formal lean? You got quality circles and quality programs and all this kind of stuff, right? Who in the room does informal lean, right? It's called continuous improvement, and I hope you all do that. So those of you who didn't raise your hand, you're in big trouble, okay? Okay, you all do informal lean. It's called continuous improvement. Oh my goodness me, you better be doing that. But the problem with lean is this: the more formally you do lean, the more it's kind of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The deck chairs are now nearly perfect. They're all ship-shaped. They're all marked out. We've continuously improved the heck out of the deck chairs. But nobody's recognizing out there, in this foggy VUCA future, there's an iceberg coming in your direction. And if you don't see it until it's too late, and you can't get out of the way of it, it's going to put a hole below the waterline of your ship, which means your ship, your business model, is now shipping water, and all of a sudden you need a new ship. Jeff Immelt realized this 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, realized that GE was too lean, and launched an enterprise-wide, enterprise-deep initiative to pivot GE to Agile. Clearly, as we've discovered, a little too late, but at least he saw it. Now, keep in mind that GE makes everything from aircraft engines to washing machines, or at least they used to. They sold that appliance business recently. And before that, financial services. So if we consider aircraft engines to financial services, is there anybody in the room that would like to try to make the case that you live outside of that spectrum? I just don't think so, do you? I think we've got the whole spectrum covered, don't you? At least for the purposes of our morning together. It goes on, some great additional articles here. Harvard Business Review in 2017. Corporate Board Member Magazine, also in 2017. Global Risk Management Survey in 2017. And then a great survey, just the first ever, from an organization called the Business Agility Institute, which was completed earlier this year. And I just want to give you a little flavor of some of the results. What you'll see in this graph is the blue line is the agile maturity of the organization. So the higher the blue line, the better. And the red bar shows you what level of organization is engaged in the agile transformation. In other words, the more senior you are, you've got your fingerprints on this, the more senior the people are that are engaged in this, the more agile maturity you achieve. This is not something that you can just abdicate to your COO. Same again here, the blue line is the maturity of agility, and then this is the timeline. Agile is not something where you just flick a switch and 6 months later, a year later, you're agile, especially when you're trying to do it enterprise-wide, enterprise-deep. It's going to take you a while to go on that journey. It's never more urgent than to get started now, because this is going to take a while. And the most crucial success factor, or the biggest obstacle, is leadership and lack of buy-in. Leadership and lack of buy-in, obviously at the most senior levels that you can get for the long-term duration, staying the course, going the distance to undertake this agile transformation. So if you like to tickle things rather than tackle things, Agile's not for you. You're wasting your time. If, on the other hand, you recognize that you need to tackle this, and until now you've only been tickling it a little bit here and a little bit there, then this is very much for you. Some great books in this space. Anybody here read the book Lean Startup by Eric Ries? Awesome book. The book starts like this. He says, look, I'm a serial entrepreneur. He says, and I wondered why I was a serial failure. And he said, one day, I'm walking through the airport, or I come across a magazine, or I'm hearing a speaker, I forget which it was. He says, I come across this thing called the Toyota Production System. And I start to read about it and research it and dig in. Lean, in other words, right? Lean. I come across this thing called the Toyota Production System, or in other words, Lean. And I wondered if I could apply Lean, big company corporate stuff, I could apply Lean to startup. He was so successful with that approach that he wrote this book, Lean Startup. And you could cross out that title and you could write the word agile, because that's what you get. When you marry lean and startup, you get agile. And I'm going to double down on that in some models in a moment for you. Okay, so that was what that book was about. Here's another great book called Scrum by one of the initiators of this whole agile movement, Jeff Sutherland. Great book. Notice the subtitle, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. I think we'd all like to achieve that. Eric Ries wrote his latest book in 2017 called The Startup Way. If you haven't read Lean Startup, don't bother. Just read that one because he does a nice summary of the previous book in that one. Again, it's all about Agile, in particular for big companies. And then this one, Stephen Denning, who's a big blogger for Forbes magazine, he just published a book called The Age of Agile. And again, case study after case study after case study, some of which I'm going to share with you today. Agile is coming of age for all businesses and all industries, and I suggest you too. Well, why now? We're doing just fine. We're posting results like this. The economy's booming. Our profitability's never been better. Our market share's never been better. Why now? Well, I suggest to you that agility is the only competitive advantage which has any permanence these days. I suggest to you that everything else is increasingly temporary, increasingly quickly. In other words, it's kind of what Jim Collins wrote about in that little book he pushed out in a hurry, just as we were teetering on the edge of the Great Recession. He wrote a book called How the Mighty Fall. And that book was all about hubris. Hubris is the highest form of arrogance. Hubris is the highest form of complacency. In other words, when you need a friend, it's too late to make one. I want you to make friends with agility before you need it. Why? Because only the paranoid survive. If you're sitting here complacent thinking, no, life's good. Why? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. No. Now's the time to fix it. In Vistage, it's all about the best getting better. That's what it's all about. This is what this is about. The best getting better. Pivoting to a more agile approach, or if you don't believe me, just trust the words of the great philosopher Mike Tyson. I don't want you getting punched in the face by unanticipated VUCA that you didn't see coming. I don't want you to get punched in the face like an average taxi cab firm. I don't want you to get punched in the face like BlackBerry. I don't want you to get punched in the face like Kodak. I don't want you to get punched in the face like GE. The time is now. And therefore, all I'm here to do today is to try to flick a switch in your brain. In future, when you go to your annual convention and there's a breakout group on agility, don't walk past. In future, when your trade magazine comes out or your favorite business magazine and lands on your desk or in your inbox and the cover article is about agility, don't drive by. Dig in. So that's the why of Agile. That's why all industries, all businesses are pivoting to Agile. Now it's like, okay, great, thanks. Now what is it? What is Agile? How does it work? Then we're going to talk about who you need to be. And then we'll take our break. And after we come back out from our break, we'll do the how, where, and when do I get started? What actions can I take to get into traction here? Let's talk about what agility is, first of all. It's an operating system. It has to address two axes of your business simultaneously. The vertical axis of operational stuff to strategic stuff, the horizontal axis of short range to mid-range to long range time horizons. Your challenge is you've got this cone of uncertainty in your business now, this cone of VUCA. And what that does is it sets up a zone up there in the top right-hand corner, a zone of uncontrollable, unplannable, unpredictable, unknowable, unexpectable stuff that's trying to punch you in the face if you're not careful. It's an iceberg coming in your direction that you don't see. And down there in the bottom left-hand corner, yeah, there's a zone of expectable, knowable, predictable, plannable, controllable stuff. There is. But the problem is, as the VUCA accelerates, that cone of uncertainty, that cone of VUCA is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what's happening is the zone of unexpectable, unknowable, unpredictable, unplannable, uncontrollable is getting larger and larger and larger, and it's bleeding down into the bottom left-hand corner. The zone of expectable, knowable, predictable, plannable, controllable stuff is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. That's the challenge. Now, you've got to wear multiple hats. Down there in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got to be doing that, right? You've got to be doing performance assurance, assuring the best possible performance that you can out of the only thing you have to work with this week, this month, this quarter. That's your current business model. We'll call that business model 1.0. That's all you've got, right? Unless you have a very benevolent banker or a very deep pockets investor or some suitcase of cash somewhere you've not been telling us about. That's all you've got to keep the lights on, to pay the bills, to stay in business, correct? So you've got to be doing that. Clearly it's not enough. You've got to be doing this as well, continuous improvement, sustaining innovation. You all do lean to some degree, or you should be. That's what it is, right there. But you've got to go above and beyond. You've got to be doing discontinuous improvement, business model 2.0. If not, disruptive innovation, business model 3.0. Because if you don't self-disrupt you are at risk that the world will for you, probably bigger, faster, sooner than your worst nightmare. That's the only safe assumption. Only the paranoid survive. Now, down here in the bottom left-hand corner, that's what we call lean. Everything below that line, we can just put in the bucket called lean. And what we're talking about is above that line, agile. And just to double down on this, when Eric Ries wrote his second book, The Startup Way, he tells a story in that book. His first book, Lean Startup, has gone viral. GE has adopted it, enterprise-wide, enterprise-deep. It's gone viral. And so much so that one day the phone rings and it's Toyota. Explaining to Eric Ries, look, we're struggling to keep up with the cockpit design of our vehicles, Bluetooth, everything. What we're finding is that most people give up using our GPS and sat-nav, and they just use Google Maps instead, putting their phone in the cradle here, because our cockpit design isn't keeping up. Could you come and help us? So Eric Ries gets engaged with his team, gets engaged by Toyota, starts introducing a much more agile approach of running a fast cycle series of experiments. That's what agile is, right? And he's in the building one day in Japan, and the guy who invented the Toyota production system, right? He's obviously an older gentleman now, right? Who's on the top floor of the building. The guy that invented the Toyota production system hears that Eric Ries is in the building and asks for a meeting. So Eric Ries gets ushered into this glorious boardroom. He sat at one end of the table. And suddenly, down the hallway comes an entourage of people. And all these minions sit here on the board table, and there at that end is the guy with an interpreter. There's a little kerfuffle with the interpreter, and all of a sudden the interpreter says, Mr. So-and-so would like to say, thank you. See, Eric Ries has been sat in there sweating, thinking, oh my goodness me, this is the guy. Am I about to get brushed off, swatted like a fly? Who the heck do you think you are to challenge me, the inventor of the Toyota production system? Instead of which, the gentleman says, thank you. There's a bit more of a kerfuffle with the interpreter. And next thing the interpreter says, Mr. So-and-so would like to say, thank you. You have described the missing half of the Toyota production system. You see, lean is awesome for the lower left part. Lean sucks for the upper right part. Lean is good when it's plannable, controllable, predictable stuff. It sucks when it is unknowable, unplannable, unexpectable stuff. Agile is awesome for that. You need both. But I like to say Agile is the new lean. Agile is becoming as ubiquitous as lean. And McKinsey is measuring that 12%, 22%. Eventually, it's going to make its way to 50%, 80%. I don't want you to get left behind. Agile is the new lean. Now, in Vistage, we call it working in and working on. And the real challenge is, how do you, as a leader, have the agile leadership presence to be able to do all of that simultaneously? Working in and on your business simultaneously in all of those different zones in the face of that VUCA. And that's what brings us now to the question of who. Who are you in this equation? Are you agile or fragile? Are you an agile leadership presence in the face of that VUCA? Or are you a fragile leadership presence in the face of that VUCA? So now let's focus in on who you are. We're back here. What I'm going to do now is going to reveal to you what I call the 5 roles of everyday agile leaders. I've learned this stuff through some of my own experiences that I'll share with you, and then studying and researching Navy SEALs, fighter pilots, firefighters, ER doctors, sports professionals, people that live in a VUCA world that has life and death consequences right now. And what I'm going to share with you now is the total model for the operating system and the 5 roles of everyday agile leaders that I want you to step up to. Then we'll take our break, and then we'll come back and talk about how do we get started. So, the first role that I want you to step up to relates to the challenge of triage. Now, I was having a conversation over at the table over here, and the word focus came up. Triage is just a more extreme word than focus. Because when you use the word triage, some different context comes up, doesn't it? Triage is a word that gets used on a battlefield. Triage is a word that gets used when you're fighting wildfires. Triage is a word that gets used at an aircraft accident, a road traffic accident with an overwhelming number of patients. Triage is a word that gets used to establish the context of a real-time unfolding, high-stakes journey of a situation like a wildfire, like an aircraft accident, like the VUCA world in which we live these days. Now, I started out my career working on oil and gas offshore drilling rigs for Shell International. I was a petroleum engineer on their international staff. I'm British, as we heard, and I worked in Holland for 5 years, working offshore and onshore for 2 of those years. When I was offshore, it's a week on, week off, helicopter out, helicopter back. When you're on 24/7. Yes, all the contractors are on board. If you've seen the movie Deepwater Horizon, there's 20, 30, 40, 50 contractors on board. They might be on board for 2, 3, 4 weeks, working 12-hour shifts. But we put a few company personnel on board. On Deepwater Horizon example, there were 4 or 5 of them. On Shell's example here, there were 2. Number 1's called the tool pusher. Number 2 is called the petroleum engineer. We're on board for a week, pulling 24/7. We sleep when we can, if we can. Now imagine what happens to me on a drilling rig if I'm so busy triaging the lower left-hand corner, I'm working in tonight's operation, that I'm not sufficiently triaging the operation that comes immediately after that and making sure that I'm fully provisioned for it and the supply boats will be here on time with all the stuff that I need. I don't have enough real estate on a drilling rig to have stuff arrive early. I clearly can't have it arrive late. It has to arrive pretty much just in time. And I've got to be all over that. Imagine if I'm so busy working in that I'm not working on the operation that will come a day or 2 after that, maybe a week after that, or maybe up in the top right-hand corner. Imagine I'm so busy doing all of that I'm not sufficiently triaging the next rig move to go to the next location and start drilling again. What happens to me on a drilling rig if I'm so busy triaging the top right-hand corner that I don't sufficiently triage the bottom left-hand corner? What happens to me? Something goes wrong tonight, we break something, we waste something, or God forbid, we injure somebody, I have to shut the rig down. If I'm so busy avoiding that in the lower left-hand corner, right, I'm so busy triaging to avoid that in the lower left-hand corner, I'm not sufficiently triaging up into the top right-hand corner, and one of my supply boats is late, or the weather changed and I had no contingency for it, then what do I have to do? Shut the rig down. If my triage goes partial either way around, too much in the bottom left-hand corner, too much in the top right-hand corner. Either way around, if my triage goes partial, I have to shut the rig down. I was on board offshore oil and gas and onshore oil and gas drilling rigs for 300 days and nights. I shut the rig down once, and I was upset. But nobody had a 100% clean record. Now, you don't get to shut the rig down, but maybe your financial performance suffers, maybe your cash flow suffers, maybe your market share suffers if you don't get your triage right. We've got to go from partial triage. Most businesses are stuck in partial triage. They're too busy working on, not sufficiently working in, or they're too busy working in, they're not sufficiently working on. We've got to go from partial triage to full triage. Now, what happens if we get it wrong? The BP Gulf oil spill, Deepwater Horizon, on a drilling rig. That's what can happen if we get it wrong. This is high stakes. In your business, it's cash flow, it's profitability, it's market share. So I would invite you right now, could you just grab a piece of paper, any way you like, and just very simply, just draw, you don't have to put all the lines and stuff on, just draw two L-shaped axes. And on the left-hand side, it's called as is. And I invite you to write 2 percentages on the left-hand side. What percent of your triage are you working in? Your time, energy, attention, resources, you're working in? What percent of your triage are you working on? Obviously, those two numbers add up to 100%, correct? So I invite you on the left-hand side to write 2 numbers. That's the as is. If you looked at yesterday, last week, last month, this year so far. On aggregate, what's the percentage of your triage below the line working in, above the line working on? And then on the right-hand side, just repeat it, another L shape, 2 numbers. Percentage working in and percentage working on, obviously it adds up to 100%. So everybody's going to have 4 numbers. And I want you to look at those numbers and ask yourself, what's the gap between the should-be triage and the as-is triage? That's the challenge in business these days. Most people, unfortunately, are engaged in partial triage. And yet you know it should be a better balance of full triage. So the first role that I want you to step up to is I want you to recognize that you are the chief triage facilitator in your business. Or if you're an executive in the room, your function, your department. You're the CEO of that, right? So I'm going to speak to you as CEOs. I want you to recognize you're not only the CEO, you're the chief triage facilitator. Trust me, if you don't facilitate full triage in your business, nobody else will. And I'm going to give you some ways to do that. When we come back from the break, I'm going to give you some ways to facilitate full triage in your business. Because partial triage is incredibly expensive, potentially life-threatening in real-world situations like an ER room, an aircraft accident, an oil and gas offshore drilling rig. This is serious stuff. So that's the first role. Second role relates to chaos, one of my favorite topics to talk about. And what we've got to do over time is move our business from disorganized chaos to organized chaos. Now, this really gets at the heart of Agile right here. So I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into this one. And we're going to understand chaos in a couple of different ways. This is what it's like in most businesses. It's disorganized chaos if you're not careful. Can't afford to be like that. What we need is a better vehicle for that journey challenge. We need an operating system for Agile. And so the question is, how do we put that in place? Well, it starts with a middle box in the middle that we'll call Agile infrastructure. And we'll do a deep dive into this. And to help us understand Agile infrastructure, we're going to talk about the infrastructure, the design of one of the most agile things that you can think of, a modern jet fighter plane. This is the F-35, multi-role, multi-service fighter that's going into service right now. The program management of the vehicle was not agile. It was utterly waterfall. I'm not talking about the program management of the project. I'm talking about the vehicle itself. Are you aware that the agility of a modern fighter plane comes from the fact that it is simultaneously designed to be unstable and stable all at the same time? On the right-hand side, the airframe, the body, the tail, the wings, the airframe is intentionally designed to be as unstable as possible. In other words, it's not designed to glide. In other words, if you turn the electronics and the software off, it's a brick. It goes one way and one way only. It's all about inertia and minimizing inertia, rotational inertia in particular. Actually, the technical design term that's used is called radical instability. And we design it to be as radically unstable as we possibly can on that side. So then what keeps it stable when we're in normal flight and we want to be straight and level? What keeps it stable? Well, it's the fly-by-wire system. So software and the electronics and the actuation, the pistons and cylinders that push and pull the flying control surfaces as we fly along. And what's happening is the fly-by-wire system is making micro adjustments to the flying control surfaces at very high frequencies as we fly along. It's like, well, okay. And it's designed to be that way on purpose as an and proposition. Now, here's the problem in business. If we start to talk about this in business, most people will lapse into an or proposition. They will think, well, should I run things loosely or should I run things tightly? Because they lapse into or thinking. Should we be unstructured or structured? Should we be highly ordered on the left or chaotic on the right? They lapse into or thinking. But here's what you know. If you ask a fighter pilot, here's what they'll tell you. If you fight a dogfight on the right-hand side, unstable, unstructured, chaotic, loose, you die. If you fight a dogfight on the left-hand side, too tight, too structured, too ordered, you die. There's only one place where you live to fight another day. It's called the agile middle. It's called the agile middle. Not on the left, because that would be too bureaucratic in business. That's clearly fragility. Not on the right. Lots of people think the right-hand side is agility. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's seat of the pants, hair on fire, frenetic. If you fight a dogfight there, you die. That's equally fragility. Agility lives in the middle. So the agility of a fighter plane comes from the fact that if I want to go 90 degrees right, boom, I can. Because the airframe says, hey, anytime you want to go 90 degrees right on the right-hand side, I'm ready. I was born ready. Oh, you, the pilot, are finally ready on the left-hand side. The pilot finally puts the command in the stick. The right-hand side says, no problem, let's go, boom. Now, if there's any inertia on the right-hand side whatsoever, then I've now got to overcome that inertia, and my 90-degree right turn looks a bit more like that. So agility comes from the marriage of both of those things simultaneously. It's not an or proposition, it's an and. Now, your problem is that you have a whole bunch of people on your team who like to play on the left. We'll call them left-brainers. Present company excluded. Those people tend to occupy the functions in your business like finance and accounting, legal, purchasing, production, right? Coding and soldering, engineering. Invention is on the other side, in the garage, right? Quality, safety, all of these kinds of functions on the left-hand side. Bless them, right? Bless them. In San Diego right now, we're building a new airport terminal, and it needs to stand up. So we need PhD engineers on the left-hand side. You got a whole bunch of people that like to play on the right-hand side. These are your artists, your conceptual people, your people, your branding people, your marketing people, bless them, your sales people. Love to play on the right-hand side. Your challenge is a whole-brained, integrative thinking approach and proposition, not an or. That's where agility lives. And that's where the Agile software development movement lives. We can't afford to be on the left-hand side, that's waterfall. We can't afford to be on the right-hand side, that's anarchy. That's why the Agile software development movement did so well. It's somewhat structured and somewhat not. what it tees up is all kinds of different ways with which we describe the agile middle. All kinds of different ways in which we describe the agile middle. We're surrounded by the agile middle. And the way I like to, and there's Eric Ries's Lean Startup book. If I marry large corporate stuff, lean, with startup stuff, I get lean startup. That's the agile middle. D. Hock called it chaotic. I like to call it disorganized chaos on the right, disorganized chaos on the left. If you take a waterfall approach in a VUCA world, you end up in disorganized chaos real fast. The ultimate form of disorganized chaos is called bankruptcy. If you can't organize you, we, the administrators, and banks will for you. Where we want to be is in the middle. That's called organized chaos. That's the flow. That's where Agile lives. When we come back from our break in about 20 minutes, or when we go to break in 20 minutes, when we come back, we'll get into how do I find the Agile middle? What are some practical, tactical things I can do to move the needle with my organization to find that Agile middle, whether I live too far on the left right now, or I live too far on the right now? How do I find that Agile middle? So it's all about chaos and finding that Agile middle with our Agile infrastructure. Now, what do I mean by infrastructure? I mean your systems, your processes. I mean your structures, your org structure, your business model structure, your financial structure. I mean your facilities, the way you lay out your shop floor, your distribution channels, your logistics, maybe even your workspace in your office. I mean how that facilitates flow. I mean meetings. We're going to talk about the concept of agile meetings. There may be some present company excluded in this comment, but in most businesses, meetings suck. They're not a source of agility, they're a source of fragility. They're not a source of traction, they're a source of wheel spin. Your belief system and your mindsets. How do you find that agile middle? How do you rewire the infrastructure of your belief system and your mindsets to find that agile middle? That's what I mean. Now, we're going to stay with chaos for a little bit because there's an even more powerful way to understand chaos and the difference between organized chaos and disorganized chaos. We've now got an agile vehicle called the fighter plane, and now we need an agile pilot to put in it. And there's a very famous model called the OODA loop. Stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act, invented by US Air Force Colonel John Boyd, who got so good at this he became known as 42nd Boyd. He threw down a challenge to any fighter pilot and said, I'll go nose to nose with you into a dogfight. And as we pass each other here, we'll radio to each other, fight on. And then, within 40 seconds, I will win. He got so good at it, he became known as 42nd Boyd. Because what he understood was this: we both go into the dogfight with an OODA loop. Trouble is, if your OODA loop is here and mine is here, I win. If my OODA loop is stronger, better, faster, smaller than your OODA loop, other things being equal, my OODA loop operates inside your OODA loop. Other things being equal, I win. So the challenge in business is, what are you going to do to shrink your organizational OODA loop? Strengthen it, tighten it, align it, integrate it, tune it, shrink it so it can iterate faster. Because the number one dogfight that you go into every single day these days is VUCA. You're in the dogfight with VUCA every single day. And if you're in the red zone, you're operating with a 1980s, 1990s kind of OODA loop in the 2000s, 2010s VUCA world. Surprise, surprise, your OODA loop is going to be operating outside the OODA loop of VUCA. And you're going to experience flow as disorganized chaos. So the question is, what can I do to shrink my OODA loop to get back inside the chaos? Because if you're in the middle and you're the green OODA loop, then you're operating inside the chaos. And you'll experience the flow as organized chaos, not disorganized chaos. So if we go back to this operating system, then what we realize is, oh, I better have an OODA loop of sorts in my business, and I better close that OODA loop, I better speed up that OODA loop, I better shrink that OODA loop. Well, that means that I'm going to have a more agile strategy process up in the top right-hand corner to get oriented to the future that's possible for me in this VUCA world. I'm going to have a more agile approach to goal setting, to lay out the path but not pour any cement around it. Because quite likely in the VUCA world, it's going to get undermined real fast, and I'm going to need to adjust and adjust and adjust and find a different path real fast. I'm going to have a very agile approach to my operations management so that I'm not sucked into working too much in my business and I'm not able to work on my business. And I better remain very agile mentally. I can't afford to get stuck seeing the world through an old lens, an old paradigm, an old wiring diagram, an old blueprint in a new VUCA world, taxi cab-like, BlackBerry-like, Kodak-like, GE-like. So what kinds of things do we mean when we talk about putting these building blocks in place? What I mean is, do not have a waterfall approach to strategic planning. Seriously? Once a year, you do a strategic retreat and you lay out a 5-year plan? Oh my gosh. And then a little while later, you do a waterfall budget that looks 18 months out, and you pour cement around your waterfall budget, and for the next 18 months, the question you ask people is, how do we get back on budget? Boss, we live in a VUCA world. Now, I'm not saying don't do any strategic planning. I'm not saying don't do any budgeting. I'm saying do agile strategy process, agile budget. We better be doing a lot of scenario thinking and scenario planning. I call it VUCA radar scanning the horizon. One of the things we say in Agile is the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. It's out on the fringe. And to see your future, go to the fringe. Radar scan the fringe for early indications of VUCA taking shape. I better do some blue ocean thinking. I better get clear about the migration of my business model 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Because if I have a 1.0 business model in a 2.0 or 3.0 world, the end is in sight, isn't it? We'll come back to the other two boxes in a moment. There's a massive element here where I want you to be the chief chaos coach in your business. I want you to recognize that if you don't step up to being the chief chaos coach in your business, if you don't coach your people to live in organized chaos, not disorganized chaos, find the agile middle with a small OODA loop, if you don't do that, trust me, nobody else will. Nobody else will. There's a massive element in here of insight, and how do we get from learning from hindsight, that's way too prevalent in business, to learning from foresight. It really introduces this middle element in the model called agile productivity. What that's really getting at is, how do we not just have a mindset of productivity for our low-level operational processes, operational productivity? What's the productivity of my sales force, my fleet, my facility? That's how we tend to think about productivity. But what about your strategic productivity? What's the productivity of your strategy process? What work products does it produce? What difference does it really make? And in particular, how well are we triaging that whole thing? How well are we avoiding excuses? I'm too busy. I'm too busy working in my business. I'm not working on my business. How many times would I shut the rig down if I'd ever used that excuse? And I would have been fired real fast. And no surprises, nasty surprises. It's really about raising our sights to the and proposition of not just learning from hindsight. We'll always learn from hindsight. But every time you learn from hindsight, I want you to look yourself in the mirror. And I want you to ask yourself, did I really need to learn that from hindsight? Or if I'd been doing more work more productively at the top of this spectrum, could I have learned that from foresight a lot more cheaply? So massive piece in here about agile productivity. Massive piece in here about luck. Luck is one of my favorite topics to talk about when it comes to agile, because luck is a lot less random than you think. Luck is where preparation meets opportunity kind of thing. And most people are woefully under-prepared. And therefore they tend to write it off as bad luck by accident rather than good luck by design. So there's a massive piece in here about culture to change our luck. And culture has to span the spectrum from culture regarding short-term stuff, pressures and priorities, all the way out to culture regarding long-term risks and opportunities. And am I too busy working in the short term that I'm not addressing the long term sufficiently? And again, in the middle of that, how well am I triaging, avoiding excuses, avoiding surprises? And it's really about changing our luck. On the left-hand side, if that's only where I operate, I'm going to likely experience a lot more bad luck by accident. And when your executive's saying to you, "Oh, boss, I'm sorry, we experienced some bad luck," I want you to realize it's not bad luck at all. It's bad management. It's bad leadership. It's bad preparation to be doing the work at the other end and experience good luck by design as a predictable asset in your business, a reliable asset in your business. Being lucky is something that you can create if you drive things to that end of the spectrum. So these two things now come into play, and what facilitates the interplay between productivity and culture is that infrastructure, finding the agile middle. And if we do that well, then that agile infrastructure facilitates a good intersection between productivity and culture. The challenge with innovation is I can often get the culture piece right. We're very creative, but I don't get the productivity piece right. We don't produce much. Or I'm so focused on getting the productivity piece right, producing something, that I shut down the creativity. But innovation takes the right intersection, the right balance of both, and how well can I facilitate the intersection between productivity and culture. That's what innovation is. And it's the agile infrastructure that facilitates that and gives you that agile innovation. Plus, by the way, these elements are what help you close and shrink your OODA loop, because that's where the arrows of the OODA loop live. And so I want you as well now to step up to being what I call the chief insight trainer, helping your people see the insights in VUCA coming at you ahead of the curve in foresight, not behind the curve in hindsight, as bad luck, not good luck. And also be that chief luck consultant. Have all the phrases on the tip of your tongue. Luck is where preparation meets opportunity kind of thing. And most people are woefully underprepared. Help people really understand that luck is huge in agility. It's a lot less random than you think. So now we come to the last item of the 5 roles. And this will start to take us up towards our break. And this is it's all about the journey. And how do we move from a waterfall orientation to the journey to an agile orientation to the journey? And this really pulls up this last piece down here that I call journey orientation. And if we now focus in on this, it's associated with this goal setting thing, and how do we take an agile approach to goal setting? And let's just focus in on it a little bit more. And what I'm going to suggest to you is we're trying to stay on this top trajectory. We're trying to stay in traction on some kind of growth trajectory. We're in traction on a trajectory to a bigger, better, brighter future. We want to avoid wheel spin. And the question that my book asked, which is called Wheel Spin, the Agile Executive's Manifesto, is why do we experience a lot more wheel spin than we should? And what I'm going to suggest to you is because of this. What most people don't realize is that we've got to pivot our orientation to what a journey is and how it unfolds. And I'm going to suggest to you that a journey unfolds in how you link and accumulate 4 things. TQDA. thoughts, questions, decisions, and actions. Now, here's how a typical innovation flow goes. We do some divergent stuff. We get things rolling. We recognize that we can't stay divergent for too long. With ideas generation, we have to converge on something, and we have our first breakthrough. Okay? The divergence continues, and we converge, and we get our second breakthrough. Divergence continues, we converge, we get our third breakthrough. As an example of this, when I'm in your groups, I tell a story of my wife and I doing this when we were going from San Diego, where we live now, back to the UK for a wedding in a little place called Hazelwood. And we had a divergent array of things we needed to think about, question, decide, and act upon: flights, hotels, cars, kids, currencies, all that kind of stuff. You can't talk about it forever. At a certain point, you have to get conversion, get the flights booked. Get conversion, get the accommodation booked. Get conversion, get the transportation booked. We did all of this stuff in this flow, and we rolled into Hazelwood on the allotted day Friday, at the allotted time, 4 o'clock, to discover that we were 300 miles in the wrong Hazelwood. Despite having had a plan, we'd written it down, we'd executed it flawlessly, and it was feeling really, really, really good. And the epiphany I had was that in the hundreds, if not thousands, of thoughts, questions, decisions, and actions, there were just a few that we didn't have. So much so that what I'm going to try to convince you of is that your agility is driven by your conversation, period. I call it conversation flow. The unfolding flow of your thoughts, questions, decisions, and actions. And are you thinking and talking about the right stuff in the right way at the right time? Or is there some VUCA coming that you're not talking about sufficiently? Are you over-talking about some things and under-talking about others? Now, when I say your agility is driven by your conversation flow, I don't mean we just sit around and talk, do I? That wouldn't be agile, would it? So notice the most important thing in this picture. For an agile mindset person, actions are a part of the conversation. They bring reality into the conversation, telling us what's working and what's not working. The question then is, are we looking and are we listening? You see, Google has a saying that conveys this idea. They say, launch early and iterate often. Don't do the waterfall thing. Launch late and iterate never. Avoiding failure, embrace failure. Launch early and iterate often. So what they do is they come out with a 1.0, sooner, not later. It's called a minimum viable product, MVP. And they release the real thing to real people. They take the real action of releasing that real thing to real people who give them real feedback. And then they iterate from there, 2.0, 3.0. Now, in most traditional project management, where do we finally take a real action? We release a real thing to real people. In most traditional waterfall relay race project management, when do we finally put a real thing in front of real people? Somewhere downstream, don't we? And what do they typically tell us about it? It sucks. And we say, but hang on, we've been giving you paperwork, PowerPoint, PowerPoint. Well, yeah, but I didn't know the cup holder was going to be there. I wanted it here. So the number one question I want you all asking, whether you are in the software business or hardware business, doesn't matter to me, is how can you take real action sooner? That's the essence of Agile. Agile is a contact sport. The sooner you contact reality by putting a real thing in front of real people, you start to take risk out of the program. How do you take realer actions sooner? That's what Agile is. And I call it C2C, conversation flow to cash flow. What I mean by that is this. You show me a business with poor cash flow, and I bet some of you in the room could. For the business overall, perhaps, or for a product line, or a channel, or a geography, or a business unit. I bet some of you could. You show me poor cash flow. Doesn't take me long at all to show you the real problem is poor conversation flow. You're not talking about the right stuff in the right way at the right time, in foresight, with full triage, with luck by design, not by accident. Architecting the journey this way, not a waterfall way. Doesn't take me long at all to illustrate that. Conversation flow to cash flow. And it's this VUCA stuff that defaults so many people down here into the lower wedge. They're spinning their wheels. It's how are you going to be an agile presence, leadership presence in the face of that VUCA to stay on the top wedge, not participate in the lower wedge. And we already heard the definition of OSM earlier from one of our sponsors. If you experience an OSM down here, an oh shit moment, what do you know was here? If that's a large oh shit moment down there, what do you know was there? A medium-sized one. Didn't just happen. What's that saying? Disasters happen slowly, 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 and then all of a sudden. So there was a medium-sized OSM that you missed. There was a small OSM that you missed. There were weak signal OSMs that you missed. By the way, weak signal opportunities on the top wedge that can become huge. You missed them. So here's what agile people do. They know this is what's happening. They put in the work to not miss those weak signal OSMs. They do the work. But you're already busy people. You've already got lots of work to do. So here's one of my favorite sayings of all time. The task of imagination is to do the work of crisis without the crisis. You see, in an increasingly VUCA world, you will do the work, won't you? You will have the conversation, won't you, about every piece of VUCA coming at you, won't you? You'll either have it up here, or because you don't, you'll have it down here. But have it, you will, won't you? And if you try to take waterfall approaches up there to having the conversation flow, you will fail. I want you to take agile approaches up there to having the conversation flow, because then you've got more than enough resources, bandwidth, et cetera, to do it. You try to take waterfall approaches to having the conversation flow up there, and you will get excuses like you've never heard before. I don't have the time, I don't have the bandwidth, I'm too busy. Until you're not, because now you're in a crisis, and now you have to do the work anyway. So the real question is, are you going to be the disruptor or the disruptee? The other thing we call that down there is a Kodak moment. We've got some classic examples of these kinds of things. Difference between BlackBerry and Apple. Who in the room still has a BlackBerry? Anybody? Oh yeah, there's always one. Who in the room used to have a BlackBerry? We'll call that 70%. Difference between Ford and GM. When we come back from our break, we're going to talk about Alan Mulally in some depth. I was blessed to have Alan Mulally come and spend the afternoon with me and my Vistage CEO group. I then got to spend a Sunday afternoon at his kitchen table, just me and him. And now I'm lucky enough to talk to him a couple of times a year. And what they understood was this thing in the middle here is what coordination, collaboration, and communication does it take to be agile. This is what it takes to build out enterprise agility. It's a T-shaped proposition. I've got to be able to do it with my executive process. That's the horizontal. I've got to drill it into the drive shaft business process of my business, whether I'm a software company or I'm a hardware company. I've got to go top down. I've got to go from side to side, not just software development and project management and manufacturing, but to the front end of the business, the back end of the business. I've got to do it bottom up. I've got to get to the very front end of the business, got to fill in the middle. Everything is agile from sales and marketing to HR. Everything is agile from the executive process top down, from the shop floor bottom up. That's what it takes. Not least of all the board process as well. As we saw from the business agility survey, the more I can get my board involved in this, the more likely I'm going to be successful. I've got to do agility at all those different levels. I've got to build the culture, and that's what can impact my share price. So how do I take my business on this journey, C to C, take my enterprise agility 1.0, 2.0, 3.0? How do I go on that transformation journey? How do I be the chief journey architect as the fifth role here? How do I put all this together, including that last piece that we just did? How does it all come together as the whole challenge, the whole problem, the whole solution? How do I get it all to integrate? is I've got to eventually come down to the clarity of translating agile strategy and agile execution into traction, avoiding wheel spin. Let me boil it down for you. You've learned 3 core concepts of what it takes to be agile. You've learned finding the agile middle. You've learned the organizational OODA loop, and you've learned this thing called journey orientation. You've learned that it's all about conversation flow. And what I'm going to call the QQC of your conversation flow. This model down here, the journey orientation, is about the quantity of your conversation flow. Are you doing the work here, or are you doing the work here? Are you driving the conversation here, or are you letting it drive you here? It's the quantity of conversation flow you're having. The quality of conversation flow you're having. Are you finding that agile middle? And the cadence of the conversation flow you're having with a small enough OODA loop to be operating inside the chaos, not outside the chaos. The QQC of your conversation flow becomes the QQC of your cash flow and share price. That is the definition of what you want from cash flow. Any CFO in the room will tell you, what I want from cash flow is quantity, quality, and cadence. That's the definition of what I want. And that's what we need of our conversation flow. The QQC of our conversation flow. When we come back from our break, we're going to understand, how do I put this whole system together as an agility operating system? How do I drive that journey? How, where, and when do I get started? When we come back from our break, we're going to look at some on-ramp actions to get you started. We're going to get into the how, where, and when. That's where we're headed when we come back from our break. Karen? Maria Thompson just came up to me. She's the CEO of Agile Sourcing Partners, and she does Agile supply chain. So here's what I'm going to challenge you to do in your industry and your business. I invite you to go to the Google search bar, and I invite you to type in some plain English phrase about your business. Insurance brokerage, real estate, manufacturing, innovation. Whatever business or industry that you're in, I invite you to type in some plain English phrases about your business, and then just put the word agile in front of it and hit send. And you'll be buried with what comes back. There are already people out there blazing a trail of agility in your business, in your industry. And I would like you to join them. Now, I am not bashful at all in helping you understand that Agile is complex. It is complex. It's a lot of moving parts. And most people massively oversimplify agility. And that's going to keep you in the fragile majority. And I want you to join the agile minority. And so where we got to is we boiled it down to this idea in the top right-hand corner of this slide. We boiled it down into this concept of conversation flow, C to C, conversation flow to cash flow. And the QQC, quantity, quality, and cadence of your conversation flow becomes the QQC, quantity, quality, and cadence of your cash flow and ultimately your share price. So now what I want you to do is I want you to do some things, therefore, to drive the quantity, quality, and cadence of your cash flow, because that will drive the quantity, quality, and cadence of your of your conversation flow, which will drive the QQC of your cash flow, which will drive your share price. So what are we going to do to drive the quantity, quality, and cadence of your conversation flow? We're going to look at an on-ramp of actions. Now, here's a link that you can go to where you can download the PDF of this presentation file, and you can download the tools and templates that I'm about to introduce you to. I'm sure that Karen might email this out to you afterwards if you like. But agilitycode.com/speaking/agile on ramp. Alternatively, just go to agilitycode.com and in the search field, just type agile on ramp and it'll get you there. When you get there, you're going to see a landing page that looks somewhat like this. It's not as visual as this, but essentially it follows the same flow. And this is the on-ramp of actions that I'm going to invite you to get started with. And it starts from the bottom up. And so where we're going to focus, first of all, is down the bottom here with the idea of agile conversation flow, or if we boil that down a little bit more, agile decision making. We said that when we do the VUCA report, most big corporations, that's the weakest score on their list. Their decision making isn't agile enough. Enterprise-wide, enterprise deep. And over and above that, agile project management of any kind of project, not just software. So the concept of agile software development got up framed into agile project management of any kind of project, not just software. When you follow the links here and you surf around a little bit, you'll find a blog that I've written that I compound called Agile Planes, Trains, Automobiles, Buildings, and so much more. And every time I hear a speaker read a book, see an article, see some research where they've looked at different case studies, then I will link it into that blog called Agile Planes, Trains, Automobiles, Buildings, and so much more. Agile is categorically not just for software. It's for everything these days, and I'm going to give you some examples. In particular, agile project management, not waterfall project management. Now, when I come to your groups, we do a deep dive into that, of how not to be waterfall with your project management, how not to be waterfall with your decision-making and conversation flow by doing this thing called the Marshmallow Challenge. And it's a fabulous little exercise, and when you follow the link, you'll see a 7-minute TED video about this exercise that debriefs it beautifully. You basically split people into teams, you give them a bunch of spaghetti, you give them some string, you give them some masking tape and a marshmallow. And I give them 12 minutes in the TED video, it's 18 minutes, to build the tallest structure that they can with the marshmallow on top. The highest marshmallow wins. And what it does is it illustrates to people, especially when we play the TED video, it illustrates to people how easily and unconsciously they lapse back into waterfall. Despite the fact that we do this after the break. So we've been together for an hour and 90 minutes. I've been talking about Agile the way I've been talking about it with you. I don't use PowerPoint in the groups. But exactly the same kind of stuff that we're covering at a lower level. Been talking about it all morning long. We put them into these groups, and as you can see here, the team on the right-hand side is building this tall, ornate spaghetti structure, and with about 10 seconds to go, they finally put the marshmallow on top, whole thing collapses. Because they lapsed into waterfall. They created a plan, they executed the plan, and they didn't contact reality by putting the marshmallow on top until they had 10 seconds left to go, and it failed miserably. A catastrophic failure. Because you see, we're educated to avoid failure. We're educated to do waterfall. And you have no idea how easily and unconsciously you lapse into waterfall. You are surrounded by waterfall people. And so that's called the Marshmallow Challenge, and that's the point of the exercise, how easily we unpivot from Agile back to waterfall. So I invite you, when you go to the link and you sort of surf around a little bit, I invite you to play that TED video called the Marshmallow Challenge, and maybe get your team in a room and play it with them. And what it really illustrates is our point. The QQC of your conversation flow, which became waterfall, became the QQC of your cash flow, which became catastrophic crisis, catastrophic failure at the very end. If we were measuring the share price of these teams, right, by the height of the marshmallow at the end of the day, their share prices crashed and burned. Miserable failures. Because we so easily and unconsciously unpivot from Agile back into waterfall. Here's an example of an organization that didn't unpivot. They pivoted from waterfall to Agile. Now, again, we have a whole spectrum of businesses in this room, right? I'm going to use some hardware examples here because it's usually the hardware end of life that people struggle with and say, well, how do you build a plane, train, automobile building with Agile? How do you do that? Well, here's an example right here. John Deere builds tractors with Agile. Just read that for yourself. The company was able to compress this time frame by more than 75%. in almost every area of the company, someone is starting to think about Agile and at least dabble with it. We see all kinds of collateral benefits. Happiness of the team shoots up. Quality shoots up. Innovation shoots up. Velocity, as measured by the amount of work accomplished each week, increased on all teams by more than 200%, some more than 400%, some more than 700% by going Agile. And that's what's happening with their share price. The quantity, quality, and cadence of your conversation flow becomes the quantity, quality, and cadence of your cash flow and your share price. So please don't be sitting there thinking, well, I run a hardware company, I build planes, trains, automobiles, buildings, whatever it is, and I can't do Agile. Yes, you can. I want you to become a student of this. Go read some of the books, download some of the stuff that I'm going to give you, figure out how you can start to do it. At least start dabbling with it, if not truly executing it, tackling it, not just tickling it. Here's another example I mentioned earlier, Saab. Saab builds fighter planes using Agile. Read that for yourselves. The result is an aircraft delivered for lower cost with higher speed and greater quality. Here's how they do it. They've got 1,000 engineers organized in 100 self-organized teams. They have this common cadence, rhythm, pulse of 3-week sprints. So rather than doing waterfall, what we do in Agile is we chunk the project into sprints, at the end of which, if you're a purist, then we would vary this a little bit, but for the layperson in the room, at the end of every sprint, we deliver something real, a 1.0. And we put that real thing in front of real people, they give us real feedback. And then we iterate 2.0, 3.0. So they're working with a fighter plane in 3-week sprints. And there we see some of the phrases: freedom within a framework, minimized hierarchy, alignment with a strategic plan, adjustment, learning. Look at their share price. So the first thing I invite you to do is to go to this link here that's up there, Agile on-ramp. These boxes are downloadable PDFs, articles, 5 or 6 or 7 page articles. So the 2 blue boxes at the bottom there, the first one is called the Top 10 Tips for Agile Decision Making. How can you move the needle on your decision making in your business? Most large corporations really struggle with this. How do you empower faster, more iterative, agile decision making in your business, no matter what size or industry or business you're in? Plus, the other blue box is the top 10 tips for agile project management. It'll give you more examples. It'll point you at the marshmallow challenge. You could do that with your team. You could really do the challenge. It's not hard to do. There's a website called themarshmallowchallenge.com that describes how you do it. Or at the very least, you can play them the TED video. And they'll really start to understand the difference between waterfall project management and agile project management, and how easily and unconsciously we unpivot from agile back to waterfall. Because that's how we've been educated. Now, I want to do a deeper dive into this topic here. We mentioned it earlier. Meetings, meetings, meetings. Now, if I hung out at the water cooler in your business, and as people came and went, I engaged them in a conversation about meetings, what kinds of things would they typically say to me? You might be an exception, but typically they're going to say they start late, they run long, they're not well facilitated, they have no clear agenda and no clear purpose. Some people dominate, some people are passive. Seems like the only action is to set the next meeting. And by the way, I'm in meetings overload. I have to do my day job at nights and the weekends. I'm burning out. Now, you may well be the exception, but in my experience, the majority of businesses, meetings are a bit of a mess. They're not a source of agility, they're a source of fragility. They're not a source of traction, they're a source of wheel spin. I invite you to change that. Because like it or lump it, agile meetings are at the heart of your enterprise agility. So I'm going to give you some resources here. I'm going to talk about some examples, okay? Hopefully you're tracking with me, right? In an increasingly VUCA world, if you want to optimize your future, you want to stay on that up trajectory, not that down trajectory. In an increasingly accelerating VUCA world, to optimize your future, you need to optimize your agility. I think we got there, didn't we? And to optimize your agility, you've got to optimize your conversation flow to be here, not here. The quantity, quality, and cadence. What's the number one tool that you have in a business, and it's not email, to optimize conversation flow meetings? Now, I'm not for one moment suggesting that all conversation flow occurs in meetings. Clearly, it doesn't. Email, voicemail, Yammer, Basecamp, Achieve It, Trello, some kind of asynchronous project management platform that you use, of course. But let's be clear. All of those are the spokes of your conversation flow system. And no amount of spokes make up for the lack of a hub called face-to-face meetings. Now, if you've got a distributed team, I'm not for one moment suggesting putting them on planes every week. Clearly not. Use WebEx, GoToMeeting, Skype, etc., and occasionally put them on planes because you know the value of a face-to-face meeting. Now, let me zoom in on this a little bit. Meetings, meetings, meetings. Here's Alan Mulally. As I said, I was blessed that he came to my Vistage group for the afternoon. We did our normal thing. In the afternoon, we processed issues. We were all sat down around our U-shaped table, of course. And I'd been told that he would be with us from 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock. He actually showed up at 1:30, which was awesome. We got ahead of the curve. And I got my members there early, about an hour early, and I'd read them the riot act. I said, look, at 3:45, we need to start closing this thing down because we do not want him to leave without the photo opportunity. So at 3:50, I'm starting to sort of lean in, right? We're in the middle of processing an issue. Alan Mulally sat right here. I'm kind of walking forwards gently to try to send the message, right, that I want to land this plane. And he can tell. So he just sat there beautifully. He waves at me. He says, Mike, relax. Go sit down. I'm not going anywhere. He was with us till 6 o'clock. And at about 5 o'clock, we'd done everything we do. You know, normally we'd finish around 5 o'clock. And then the members started asking him questions. He gets up at the whiteboard. And he starts sketching out his approach of how he turned around Boeing Commercial Airplane Division post 9/11. It was on its knees. And then if you remember, he got headhunted over to turn around Ford. He joined Ford in 2006, 2007 when they were making record losses and retired 2014 when they were making record profits. By the way, he's now on the board of Google, or rather Alphabet. He's on the board of a 3D printing company, etc., etc., etc. Well, anyway, he gets up at the flip chart. He's sketching away. And at one point he says, that's Mike's Agile stuff. So I go grab a red pen and I write Agile around. And I'm looking at my members, pleading with them, take the photo. Fortunately, one of them does. This is interesting, you see. Agile planes, trains, automobiles, buildings, and so much more. When I was sat at Alan's kitchen table that afternoon, that's what he said. He said, most people would assume that taking a wide-body commercial airliner to market is a fundamentally waterfall process. Categorically wrong. It's a circular agile process in which you're constantly iterating. And at the bottom there, he says, I was kind of the leader for this at Boeing. He was with Boeing for 38 years. He graduated with an aerospace engineering degree, aeronautics degree, and joined Boeing, as a 20-something-year-old. He worked on every aircraft program ever, increasingly promoted. And he championed this more agile way of working as he got promoted. And, it's not without some tension, right? It's not without some tension. Everybody got mad because everybody's so waterfall. We're educated waterfall. But he stuck with it, and he stuck with it, and he stuck with it. And very early on in that whole trajectory, what he realized was, I need a central cog in the wheel to keep this agile process turning over in organized chaos, not disorganized chaos. And he launched what he called his Thursday morning business plan review meetings, BPR meeting. So that's where it came from, as part of his bigger system that he called working together. This is what happened to Boeing's share price during his tenure. The red line is when he became the CEO. QQC, there it is. You want to drive the QQC of your cash flow and your share price? Drive the QQC of your conversation flow by having this hub meeting called a Thursday morning business plan review meeting. Now, he got recruited away to become the CEO of Ford in 2006. And if you haven't read the book American Icon, it's a great book, by the way. It's a great read. Most of this is reported in that book. And he was asked by two board members when he was being interviewed for the job. They said, Alan, we'll be honest with you. You're kind of the lead candidate. If you get the job, how much bloodletting are you going to do? How much of the old guard are you going to axe out? That was his answer. I won't need to. You see, what I'll do is I will immediately instigate the same stuff at Ford that I did at Boeing to turn around Boeing, and I'll do it here at Ford. And the A players will love it, the C players will hate it, and the B players will be on the fence for a while. The C players will start heading for the door with a little help from me. The B players, some will get down on the C side with a bit of help from me, and some will get down on the A side, welcome. It'll self-sort itself out. He called it his working together program or plan, same as he had at Boeing. He did exactly the same thing, a weekly BPR meeting of his global team, followed by something called the SAR meeting, special attention review. Those things where we're still spinning our wheels, we can't get out of wheel spin, let's roll our sleeves up together. And, with you and you, I think you could be great to stick around. The rest of you, great, we're done, you can leave, thanks so much. And let's roll our sleeves up together, not so we can beat you up, but so that we can do Vistage-like issue processing. We can unlock this thing to get out of wheel spin and get into traction. So he called that an SAR meeting, special attention review. Look at this, he had 100 people in this weekly BPR, plus guests. He had 320 PowerPoint slides. Now, at that point, I watch your eyebrows very carefully because most people raise their eyebrows and go, what, is this guy an idiot? No, he just got inducted into the top 10 corporate CEOs Hall of Fame of all time. He's got a lot of things to triage around the world, hasn't he? 320 things. Factories were opening and closing. Programs were starting and stopping. Alliances were building and disbanding. Selling Jaguar, selling Volvo, renegotiating with every union in every country. Relaunching the product line. He's got a lot of stuff to triage. So each slide is just a template approach to that triage of that individual issue, whatever that slide is, and up in the top right-hand corner of that slide, it has a little diamond shape called colored red, orange, or green. Triage. He said, Mike, in Boeing, we had it lickety-split, 2.5 hours. First time I did it in Ford, 3 days. A little while later, 2.5 hours. 320 PowerPoint slides, 100 people plus guests. And this is why he did it. We need everybody. We need to be ready for action. We're the decision makers. We need to make decisions and not pass the buck. And then, by the way, he did a daily SAR. Just for an hour, every single day. What's hot and what's not? What's changed overnight? What's Obama done last night that we need to react to today? Think about why he would do that. He's running a $150+ billion company, and he's doing the same thing that an agile software development team would be doing. He's having a daily stand-up, what is often called a daily scrum. Okay, there's that practical use of the word scrum. Every single day with his global team, not for 2.5 hours every day, maximum 1 hour. Why would he do that? Because he knew I need to massively, massively, massively shrink our organizational OODA loop. And we have to be fully triaging everything all the time. That's why he did it. Sometimes he went to twice a day. And here's what he said: when the world moves faster, we need to adjust faster. It's not the strongest, it's not the smartest, it's the most adaptable to change. This is what happened to the share price. The second red line is where he left. So the share price did well between when he joined and when he left. When he left, he promoted Mark Fields to become the CEO. Mark was a long-time Ford executive. And unfortunately, he wasn't there very long. He was there 3 years and he got fired. Last year, he got fired. And when he got fired, because Vistage knew of my relationship with Alan Mulally, they reached out to me and they asked me, could you write a blog about why Mark Fields got fired? So I wrote the blog which Vistage published. And here's what I said. Number one, you've got to be able to deliver an and proposition. You've got to be able to do all of this simultaneously. You've got to maximize what is. You've got to invent what isn't. And you've got to seamlessly lead the transformation between one and the other. Here's what Bill Ford Jr. said. So the day after they fired Mark Fields, Bill Ford Jr. held a video press conference. Mark Fields wasn't there clearly, but his replacement was. And Bill Ford Jr. spoke for quite some time, and he said, I need somebody who can be integrating future thinking into an operation and help to seamlessly deliver the future that is being envisioned. Keyword seamlessly. It's an and proposition of both. It's not one or the other, it's one and the other. Operations and future simultaneously. Let's go a little bit further. In other words, I've got to be migrating multiple business models. 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. These are Bill Ford's words. I've got to be maximizing the current business model. That's what Bill Ford said. I need a new business model embedding next generation platforms. Those are Bill Ford's words. And I need a revolutionary new business model embracing the new industry landscape. 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. This is what Bill Ford said. I need all of that as an and proposition. And then he said this: any one of those is a big task. And we have to do all three. I need a CEO that can do all three. And the last one down, bottom left, making decisions with agility. As we said earlier, that's the weakest score on the list. How do we drive the agile conversation flow to cash flow? How does that impact share price, etc.? And this is what Bill Ford Jr. said. We need to speed up our decision making. The clock speed, that's his word, his phrase. In other words, OODA loop. The clock speed of our competitors requires us to make decisions at a faster pace. If we're going to win in the new world, we need to break down the hierarchy and we have to empower the team. We have to move fast and we have to trust our people to move fast. Those are Bill Ford Jr.'s words. Mark Fields wasn't able to keep doing what Alan Mulally had done. 3 years later, he's fired. Their profitability was still good. Their market share was still good. Their product line was still good. So if Mark Fields was coming to his monthly Vistage meeting, if he's not careful, he's signing in saying, good, good, good. And yet their share price was on a slippery slope. Why? Because all the analysts knew and all the investors knew that the likelihood is that in an increasingly VUCA world, Ford is going to be a loser, not a winner. They're going to be a victim, not a victor. They're going to be on the down wedge, not the up wedge. That's what they knew. Because Mark Fields wasn't doing what Alan Mulally had done. If you read some of the internal intelligence, he was canceling the meetings that Alan Mulally had been running. He wasn't having them. We're too busy. We don't do that stuff. So they weren't having the daily meetings and the weekly meetings. The QQC of your conversation flow becomes the QQC of your cash flow. I want you to change that. Here's another fantastic example, another great book, Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. He's appointed Supreme Commander of Special Forces in Iraq in 2003. And he quickly realized we're failing as measured by IEDs and casualty rates. And yet we've got the best maneuver warfare machine on the planet. It doesn't get any better. How are we losing? What he realizes is he's got to find this agile middle, the adaptability, agility, and cohesion of a small team with the power and resources of a giant organization. And what he realizes is that we have got stuck in the way that we do maneuver warfare. And what he realized is we're doing 2.0 maneuver warfare where the enemy has moved on to 3.0 networked warfare, and we need to beat the bad guys at their own game. So he decided that we're going to discard a century of conventional wisdom about maneuver warfare, and we're going to move to this new 3.0 thing called networked warfare. We're going to tear down the silos, and we're going to make a team of teams that is flatter, faster, and more flexible. And he's written, obviously, a great book about this and relates it to business, of course, which we're talking about here. So here's what he did. He immediately instigated a shift from the old paradigm of information sharing in maneuver warfare is called need-to-know basis, secrecy. What happens is we get a piece of intelligence, we pass it back up the chain to that decision maker that has need-to-know information, oversight on the situation, full context, full situational awareness. They can make a decision. They pass the decision back down the chain. 3 days later, we go bust the door down. Trouble is, bad guys left already because yesterday they tweeted each other. So what he declares is, we're going to move from need to know to everybody knows everything all the time. He gets a phone call from the Pentagon. The Pentagon says, do you not understand how secrecy works? He says, do you not understand how life and death works? Click. He launches this daily O&I, Operations and Intelligence meeting. Amazingly, it hadn't happened before then. Initially in his wooden hut command center, fully technology enabled. Anybody in the world, anywhere, including a special forces operative on a sat phone behind a rock and dial into this meeting. At the peak, more than 7,000 people participate in this daily operations and intelligence meeting. If you read these books, if you read this one, if you read the one about Al-Mulali, what you'll realize is they point at their approach to meetings as the central, pivotal algorithm of their whole turnaround approach. Now, I watch your eyebrows. Most people go, 7,000 people? Was this guy an idiot? Right? No, you got to do it the right way. Otherwise, you got people talking over everybody. It'd be white noise, right? But 7,000 people. This, by the way, is me, as you can tell. I am increasingly working with one client in Orange County, south of LA, spending more of my time there. This is a daily Scrum meeting that we have in my office. I'm not having the same daily Scrum meeting every day. You don't have to do this in a one-size-fits-all kind of way. Across the 5 days of a week, we have 5 different daily Scrum meetings, or in effect, weekly Scrum meetings, one a different day of the week. On a Monday at 11 o'clock, it's the executive team. That's the executive team that you can see there, the C team and the VPs. You can't quite see them all, of course, but there's about 12 people in my office stood up. 11 o'clock to 11:30. Never, ever starts 1 second late, not ever. Never finishes 1 second late, not ever. It's stand-up. It's a Scrum meeting. You can see on the whiteboards in the top right-hand corner, the whiteboard behind me in the top right-hand corner lays out the trajectory of the journey that we're on and the path that we're finding, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Okay, so behind me on that whiteboard is the strategic plan on a whiteboard. Agile strategy process, not waterfall strategic planning. The whiteboard that's bottom right here, which is in front of me, you can see it out of focus. That is the Scrum board of all the hot stuff that we're working on right now. And there's an inventory of sticky yellow memos on that whiteboard capturing those open items that we're working daily, weekly. Notice how visual my office is. If you go into most offices, what do you see on the walls? If you're not careful, art, or maybe nothing. Think about why is a cockpit such a visual place? Think about why the control room of a nuclear power station is such a visual place. Think about the war room for General Stanley McChrystal is such a visual place. Because the best way to do full triage is visually. So I invite you, when you get back to your office, I invite you to look at the walls. In my estimation, in most businesses, one of the least leveraged assets that you have is your wall space. And I invite you to think about doing at least a weekly scrum, if not a daily scrum. I did a daily scrum meeting every business I ever ran and every function I ever led before that. I've sometimes done the same scrum meeting every day, truly a daily scrum meeting. Or sometimes I've done 5 days of weekly scrum meetings. We have a massive project that we're rolling out, which is a technology platform. And so on Fridays at 1 o'clock, we have a weekly scrum, multi-departmental, for an hour, actually, in that case, on the platform. This gentleman in the pink shirt, top right, he's the Chief Technology Officer. He runs that scrum. I'm there as a participant, as are multiple departmental people, from 1 o'clock till 2 o'clock on a Friday. And then immediately following that at 2 o'clock, we have a special attention review meeting for another hour for those people that we need to stick around and those things that are unresolved and those things that we're going to really tackle right here, right now. I invite you to suspend judgment about this idea, and I invite you to go to these 3 green boxes and download. These are each a PDF, okay? I invite you to at least suspend judgment long enough to download those 3 PDFs. And what you're going to see there on the right-hand side is the top 10 tips for agile meetings. How do you get out of this mode that most businesses are in? Meetings are a mess. A friend of mine came up with the phrase mediocrity. How do you get out of that mode and move the needle over to agile meetings? I've got 10 tips to get you started. One box inside of that is one called the myths, mysteries, and magic of daily meetings. Most people have this reaction to the idea of a daily meeting. Yet Alan Mulally did it. General Stanley McChrystal did it. I did it. Every business I ever run, I'm doing it now. I just invite you to suspend judgment for long enough to download that article. There are about 15 things in that article, the myths, mysteries, and magic of daily meetings. By the way, you will read a lot of comments from Vistage members who initially probably reacting like you are, oh my gosh, was this guy crazy? And then they did it, and now they think you're crazy not to do it. And then the last one is, you've got to do good facilitation of agile meetings. You've got to be an agile facilitator. So there's the top 10 tips for agile facilitation of agile meetings. Meetings, meetings, meetings are the heart of your enterprise agility. You could be moving the needle on your enterprise agility starting tomorrow morning if you chose to, or at least Monday morning if you want to buy yourself a little bit more runway. So action number 3 is called the daily meeting. Action number 4 is called a meetings matrix. Those 3 PDFs will introduce you to the concept of a meetings matrix. I want you to get really clear about the portfolio of meetings that you're going to run in your business to drive your conversation flows proactively here in foresight so that you can experience good luck by design reliably and predictively. You can stay in organized chaos doing the work of crisis before a crisis. Anytime you look in the rearview mirror and you find yourself learning from hindsight in disorganized chaos, doing the work of crisis in a crisis, what that's telling you is the filter of your meetings matrix is not tight enough to keep those conversation flows ahead of you. Some of it got through and is now behind you in the rearview mirror. If you download these resources, one of the things I invite you to do is what I call a chaos journal. I've got 2 new friends in the room here who have a chaos-oriented business. I invite you to do a chaos journal. Every time you experience disorganized chaos, doing the work of crisis in a crisis, learning from hindsight, I want you to write something down in a journal. A little leather-bound thing, or your iPhone, or your iPad. If you've only got 20 seconds, just write down the headline. What happened? If you've got 2 minutes, what happened? Why did it happen? Where did it happen? Who was involved? How did it get messed up? Every once in a while, I want you to page back through that chaos journal and look for what? Patterns. Because what those patterns are telling you is your meetings matrix is full of holes. And you're not keeping those conversation flows ahead of you. They're getting through behind you, and now you're having those conversations in the rearview mirror, not through the windshield. Not too many meetings. I don't want you to be over there on that bureaucratic side of that fighter plane. I don't want you maximizing meetings. Some people say to me, Mike, you don't understand. My boss doesn't like meetings. My boss thinks meetings are a waste of time. My boss wants us back at our desks doing our day job. You may have said those things to your people. Maximizing meetings, wrong answer. Minimizing meetings, wrong answer. Optimizing meetings, right answer. Big paradigm shift. Most people think meetings at best are time consuming and at worst are time wasting. Wrong. Agile meetings are time saving. Agile meetings are chaos saving. Agile meetings, in the case of Alan Mulally, are business saving. And in the case of General Stanley McChrystal, life saving. I invite you to flick a switch up here. Download the resources, suspend judgment long enough, and really become a master of Agile meetings. I want you to go further. Up to the next level is all about culture. How do you implement a culture of agility, the mindsets, the skill sets, the tool sets? Talk a little bit about GE. They tried to do this. Their share price was on a long-term slippery slope since when Jack Welch left in 2000. It was bouncing back a little bit. And they adopted the work of lean startup because they thought we're just crazy enough to think that this agile software development stuff could be employed on hardware stuff. Look at the example there of an aircraft engine. And they started to deploy this. 100 projects covering the landscape from new product introductions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And their share price began to react well to it. And then the wheels came off. Share price plummeted. If you don't truly embed Agile into your culture, it's going to be a short-term impact. How GE went from American icon to astonishing mess, 126-year history. They were held up as an American icon. After a long, proud run, there's that saying, going bankrupt gradually and then suddenly. They were famous for great management. They were an icon. There was wizardry. Then the wheels really came off. And then they got booted from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And now, yesterday, their latest CEO got fired. If you don't truly embed Agile into the culture, it's going to be a very short-term gain, very short-term benefit. So if you download that article, that's the top 10 tips for an Agile culture, and it's going to get you into actions number 5 and number 6. Number 5 is declaring war on excuses. Most businesses are riddled with excuses. I don't have time, I'm too busy, I don't know how, I'm overwhelmed. If I hear someone say I'm overwhelmed, what I ask them is, well, are you overwhelmed or are you under-organized? Under-organized for chaos. Under-organized for agility. Most people are overwhelmed because they're under-organized. They don't do daily stand-ups. There's nothing on their walls. You can't triage that way. And in an accelerating VUCA world, if you're not triaging enough in the Agile middle with a small enough OODA loop, you're going to live a life sentence in disorganized chaos and crisis management. If you keep going up, level 7, and click on some links, you'll find some links there when you get there. This will engage you a little bit in some blue ocean thinking, scenario thinking and planning. How do you keep migrating your business model 1.0, 2.0, 3.0? Level 8, it's all about institutionalizing these processes over time into your business. It's complex. It's going to be a 2 or 3 year journey. But don't allow yourselves to ignore that complexity. Do you know there's 2 kinds of simple? Stupid simple. I'm often caught up by the KISS principle. Can't we just keep it simple, stupid? If you're okay with stupid simple, which ignores complexity. And there's elegant simplicity, beautiful simplicity. Just look at your iPhone. Elegant simplicity embeds complexity. Stupid simplicity ignores complexity. Don't let yourselves oversimplify agility. It's complex. And at the very top level, if you click on some links, it'll be there when you get there. This is about what I call traction planning and how do you implement a triage system so that you can triage all of this stuff all the time, not just inclusive of daily stand-ups and that kind of stuff, but software platforms and project management tools and all that kind of stuff that you need. What I've tried to do here is to give you the speed tour through the complexity of agility. It is complex, but it can be boiled down to the simplicity in the top right-hand corner. The QQC, quantity, quality, and cadence of your conversation flow becomes the QQC of your cash flow and share price. If you don't like your cash flow, what I urge you to do is look at your conversation flow, go back to these on-ramp actions to inflect your conversation flow onto that trajectory so that your cash flow can follow it. We've been on the speed tour through the backbone of these questions and we've bust some myths today. You guys have been awesome. Thanks for having me very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Don't run off. We're going to bring you back up for Q&A. But now is the time to complete your feedback form. There's slots at the top if you just want to insert your business card instead of writing the information out. And check yes next to any of the partners to schedule a free consultation with them. If you're curious about what they had to say, you're interested, just want to have a follow-up conversation, just check yes. We will also be posting the information on the website, just so don't worry about that. We want to know the ideas, the 2 ideas, the big takeaways for you, and most importantly, what action you're going to take around those. And finally, please share with us suggestions for improvement. We always like to get better year after year. You can exchange this feedback form on your way out for a free parking pass. For those of you that are going to lunches, just keep straight where it is that you're headed. Mike, come back up for Q&A. I'm sure they've got lots of questions about all that information you just shared with us.
So who wants to be brave and throw out the first question? Yes, sir. Do we have a microphone for the gentleman, or?
We do. We've got roving.
Thank you, Mike. What an awesome, I wasn't ready for this today, so I just want to say, firstly, congratulations. We run an international company, and I can't tell you how much I've learnt this morning. Like a lot of companies, I guess we all do parts of what you talked about, but bringing it together, I think, is going to be a great roadmap for me in the future as the CEO of our company. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just my question is this. I love the metaphor, the scrum. Unfortunately, I'm not an All Black, but I am an Australian, and we play the game. But one of the things that I think is significant there for me is you have a scrum, but you also have a field, and you can't put your foot out. So my question is, how do you actually provide that guidance for that team in order to let them do what they need to do, but at the same time, give them parameters?
It's great. It's a great question that really gets to the heart of it. When you think about the agile middle, we understand that we can't be too loose. There are no lines around the edge of the field, right? Anybody can go off the reservation to any degree they want. But on the other hand, we can't be too tight, and there are big, thick lines around the edge of the field. So it's like, how do we find the agile middle? That's why the culture piece is there, the top 10 tips for an agile culture. Because if you think about it, the core values and then the behaviors that you get into more detail with, if you download that article, the top 10 tips, those core values and then the behaviors, they draw the lines. And I'm a big fan of challenging people to define their core values at a more granular level. What are the behaviors, for each core value, what are the behaviors that we always want to see and hear around here? Because some of the core values happen through vocabulary, right? Sometimes I see somebody do something, but oftentimes I see and hear them say something, okay? What are the behaviors I want to see and hear always around here? And on the flip side, never around here. We will never criticize a customer. And the nevers came from Peter Schutz, who came to my Vistage group many years ago. He was the ex-CEO of Porsche and had turned Porsche around in the 80s, I think it was. And he talked about articulating their core values as nevers. You sort of box out the behaviors you don't want, and that leaves in the box the behaviors you do. For me, that was a little sort of asymmetrical, so I like to do both. Because it often isn't symmetrical. It's not just enough to say the always, because there's some white space of nevers that you'll still get. It's not enough to say the nevers, because there's some white space of always. So I like to help people get down to the granularity of what I can see and hear around here, because I can't hold you accountable for integrity. I can't hold you accountable for integrity. I don't think you have the integrity we need around here. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Yes, I do. I can only hold you accountable for something I can see and hear, or see and hear the absence of. Hey, can we chat? In that meeting, you just did this. We don't do that. You didn't say that. It was a beautiful opportunity to say that, and you didn't say it. That's what we do around here. We need to talk about your integrity. So you get down to that level of granularity, and then if you remember, the action item said, I want you to institutionalize your core values in 100 places, mechanisms, approaches, means around your business. That's what the action item said. And if you download the PDF, you'll see that. 100? Oh, I could understand GE doing 100, but we've only got 50 employees. Oh, no, I know what he means. He means give everybody a paperweight. That's 50, right? No, that's 1. Oh, put it in the lobby. Hang it in the lobby. That's right. Okay, that's 2. Put it on the website. That's 3. Put it on the back of everybody's security badge. No, that's 1. So now we're at 4. What's my point? If you're not going to drive your core values into the DNA of your business, if you're not going to institutionalize it broadly and deeply, you're wasting your time. Now, if you've already got a set of core values, I'm not telling you to change them. If you read the article, Top 10 Tips, I just want you to sprinkle Agile in there somehow. You might put a frame around them all and talk about agility. You might put the word Agile in front of innovation, Agile innovation. You might find another way to sprinkle a bit of agility pixie dust into your core values, or in some cases, if you've got 6 core values, you might add a 7th, agility. Those are the guardrails to help your business stay on track, to stay on that upper trajectory. Does that answer your question? Okay. Somebody else. Be brave. What do you want to know? Yes. Do we have a microphone?
Thank you today for your presentation.
This is the Agile lady that I was talking about earlier?
Yes, I've been loving it. My company's name is Agile Sourcing Partners, so every time he says Agile, yes. But one of the things I see that we struggle in our industry with very complex supply chains, we're with huge companies, is when you have a daily scrum call, people tend to really focus on the tactics of the moment. So even those Post-its just lends itself to being a firefighter in a sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies that use different software tools to manage it, they miss sight of the foundational, procedural, kind of boring stuff that needs to happen. So how do you balance that where you're not just gravitating towards the firefighting? And you say, wait a minute, we need to update job descriptions, or we need to change the procedure. I mean, that's just pretty
Several thoughts come up. Great question.
Fun to do.
Yeah, great question. Several thoughts come up. Most people that claim to do a daily scrum don't. It's a coffee chat. What are you doing today? What are you doing today? What did you do yesterday? What are you doing tomorrow? That's a coffee chat. I'm not saying don't do that. If you want to have a coffee chat, have a coffee chat. But that's not a daily scrum. A daily scrum is going to have a flow. If you download the article, you'll see that it has a flow. And typically sales and marketing will go first, then project management, then production, then customer service, et cetera, finance, HR, right? There'll be a flow. And there's a set of questions that you ask people to report out. Accomplishments yesterday, accomplishments today, impediments, okay? Impediments, friction, oil slicks, wheel spin, barriers, hurdles, brick walls. I just can't seem to get support out of accounting. Stuff like that. And then the fourth one is critical paths. Now, what that last one does is it gets us out of this day-by-day radar scope that I got in my head, this glass box, where if I'm not careful, I look one day backwards and one day forwards. Now, that is the essence of a daily scrum, but what about our flagship annual trade show that's coming up 5 months from now, and we are woefully behind the curve? As usual, it's turning into a fire drill. And we have a monthly meeting to be tackling that, but that thing has gone into wheel spin. It's still 5 months away. Yeah, but I'm now going to take that and I'm going to import that into our daily scrum until that thing is back in traction, when I'll let go of it again. There could be a problem that we had 5 months ago. It's in our rearview mirror, and we have not yet fully harvested all of the learning that is there to be had. I'm not going to let that thing just drift off into the distance, because then history will repeat itself in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to keep that thing as a daily scrum item, or at least a weekly scrum item, until we're 100% clear we have fully peeled that onion and institutionalized stuff into our process and blocked and tackled things into the right way. Plus then, don't forget that your daily scrum or your weekly scrum, if you have a series of different ones on a different day, is just one line item in your meetings matrix. And your meetings matrix is going to have other meetings that happen twice a month, once every 2 weeks, monthly, quarterly, and everything in between. So your meetings matrix is and annually, right? Your meetings matrix is going to have the other meetings that happen on other frequencies. And I like to organize a meetings matrix from most frequent at the top to most frequent at the bottom. And by the way, you get really clear, the way you organize it is there's a column called OODA loop frequency. Right? So the point is, you get really clear on what does the OODA loop frequency need to be for these different kinds of meetings and the bulletized agenda items that go with each meeting. And sometimes you might say, you know what, I'm really not sure we need to be addressing that bullet point as frequently as that. Let's export that bullet point from this meeting to this meeting. And we'll do it a little less frequently. But when you have that built, and you're doing all the firefighting in the daily meeting, what happens is you get a cascade benefit flowing downhill to all these other meetings. Because all the firefighting is happening here, it doesn't need to happen in all these other meetings. You see, most monthly meetings are not monthly meetings. Most monthly meetings spend the first 2/3 of the meeting talking about what happened last week. Most monthly meetings are weekly meetings in disguise plus a bit. Most quarterly meetings are not quarterly meetings. We spend the 2/3 of the quarterly meeting talking about what happened last month. So if we get this collateral benefit up here, all the firefighting occurring on a daily basis up here, we get a collateral cascading benefit to all the other meetings where they actually get to be the meetings they're supposed to be. Not least of all, you will do an annual strategic review, but you'll do a really rigorous quarterly check-in on that to adjust. Monthly, weekly. In other words, you will have OODA loops within OODA loops, won't you? You'll have a daily OODA loop, a weekly OODA loop, a monthly OODA loop, a quarterly OODA loop, and an annual OODA loop. You'll have OODA loops within OODA loops within OODA loops. You already do. I'm just making that more conscious for you. Does that make sense? Other questions? Yes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for your time and for your insightful presentation. I have about 14 questions, so I'll try to narrow it down. The first is your concepts remind me of the ambidextrous organization. And I wonder if you have any insight on that, this idea of having two sides to your organization, one focused on CI and optimizing and one focused on innovation. It sounded very much like your 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, but I don't know
You
if
said
you consider that the same.
ambidextrous, correct?
The ambidextrous organization.
Yeah, and so really these three models go together, right? What we boiled down to the QQC, the quantity, which is the two wedges. Am I doing the right quantity of conversation up here so I don't have to do it down here? The quality, which is finding the agile middle, fighter jet, and the cadence, which is the OODA loop, small enough, strong enough OODA loop. Those three things go together. It's like standing on a pinhead, right? 2 out of 3 doesn't work. You need 3 out of 3. But for me, the ambidextrous thing really takes us mostly back to the idea of the fighter plane and the agile middle. We live in the middle. I've been in the middle all morning long, especially now, right? When you drove here today, you were in the middle. Hopefully you didn't drive like this. Hopefully you didn't drive like this, right? You know, with a coffee cup here and a hamburger here and a cell phone there and steering with a knee, right? Too loose, too tight. It's in the middle. The middle is called the Goldilocks zone. It's called the golden mean. You saw a few other expressions, freedom within a framework, the paradoxical middle, or paradoxical blend from Jim Collins. We're surrounded by, threading the needle, we're surrounded by phrases that describe the middle. Ambidextrous is one of them. I'm not too hands-on, I'm not too hands-off, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not too introvert, I'm not too extrovert. I'm somewhere in the middle. Does that answer your question?
It does. My second question is, how do you distribute resources differently to execute this model?
Well, having a real clear view of what your business model is, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, in all of its layers. So if you really want to get into business model, you've got to understand it's a multi-layered thing. There's a financial model, an organizational model, a product strategy model, product suite, service strategy model, investment model, facilities model, right? All of these things have to go hand in hand, not least of all the organizational model. And how do we deploy our resources? And how do we up the productivity of our resources? And how do we not engage in waterfall? How do we engage in agile? That is one of the core questions. And so in this company that I'm working more and more with, that is one of the most challenging things that we're working on, is how do we find the agile middle with an organization chart that's going 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, not too tight and not too loose, and where do we really need pillars of strength that we don't have, and we've got to bring them in. We've just recruited a VP of e-learning because we need to prop that up. We just recruited a VP of sales strategy because we need to prop that up. And now my job is I'm kind of the co-pilot to the entrepreneurial CEO, the founder, who recognizes he lives over there on the loosey-goosey side, the right-hand side for you of the fighter plane. He lives over there. He's a genius, but he lives over there. I kind of on a good day, I live in the middle. I was born on the left because I'm an engineer. But on a good day, I can live in the middle, and I can facilitate the middle. I know how to do that. So that's my job, is to facilitate the middle. Now, if you don't have the skill set, if you're a natural entrepreneur, and, organization sends shivers up your spine, then you've got to get yourself a co-pilot that can facilitate that middle, because somebody's got to do it. Does that answer your question? Who's got one more? Somebody over here? Okay.
Hi, thanks again for your presentation. Super enlightening. We are one of the chaos companies, smarterchaos.com, and my title is actually Chief of Chaos, so this actually goes very well. Could you just comment and expound a little bit further in a different area of business, different business model? You've talked about this applying to product companies and coming out of software companies, et cetera. What about the service industry? Yeah. As we look to service in the digital marketing agencies, we find ourselves running from fire to fire a lot of times, created by the clients themselves, because their priorities become our priorities, and sometimes, you know, they're great fires where we shouldn't be putting our attention, et cetera. So how do we apply agility or agile in a service organization where a lot of times if we have 100 clients, we have 100 different fires at any given time, whatever that client is pointing our team's head at. Does that make sense? I'm looking for how do we apply this in our organization?
So that company that I'm working more and more with is a service company. It's an education company. As part of our 2.0, 3.0 evolution, we are coming to market with a product, a platform, but essentially the platform really facilitates the service. So it's still a service company. And so everything I'm talking about here applies to, you know, a hardware company, a software company, a service company, and everything else in between. One of the ways I like to say this is a service company has to be going on the business model migration journey 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 as much as a product company. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. But one of the ways I like to articulate this is this. I've always run product companies, and now, but increasingly with service elements, and now sort of I'm crossing to the other side, as it were. Every product company I ever ran, whether it was hardware or software, in the P&L had a line item called R&D. Of course it did. That's called our future. I would challenge any service company in the room, get out your P&L and show me where on your P&L there's a line item called R&D. There may be one or two exceptions in the room. Most service companies don't have a line item in their P&L called R&D. And yet there's as much R&D to do in a service company as there is in a product company, unless you're happy just staying at 1.0. So 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and therefore, everything we've talked about, the Agile middle with a small enough OODA loop. And what Agile really is Agile is a contact sport where we run a fast series of experiments to test and verify our assumptions about what our customers need and want and are willing to pay for at a price that is profitable for us. If we allow ourselves to lapse into waterfall and we flick a switch one day on a big bang day, until that day when we finally contact reality, it's all theory. It's all assumption. And therefore it's massive risk. We've all had those catastrophic failures that then happen. So Agile is about don't do that. Do a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 and start contacting reality here, whether you're a product company or a service company. To do that, you're going to need to have an Agile middle with your infrastructure. You're going to need to have a small enough OODA loop and a well-organized org chart that's keeping up with everything to be able to do it. But it applies as much to a service company as it does a product company. And if you follow the links and you read Agile planes, trains, automobiles, buildings, and so much more, you'll find service company after service company after service company. Just go to Google, type in banking, and put the word Agile in front of banking. You'll be buried. You'll be buried. The service companies are blazing this trail as much as anybody else is. Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you for that. Mike will be available up front for additional questions if you have some. But at this point, we're going to wrap up. Be sure to exchange your feedback card for your parking pass. And we'll post a video of the entire presentation and the slide deck with all the links on our website, coloradoceoforum.com, probably by Monday, but no later than next Friday. Thank you to our partners who made this day possible, and thank you for being here. It's been a great day, and please join us again next year for our 20th annual Colorado CEO Forum, first Tuesday of October, so that'll be October 1st with Brian Bolio. Thank you for being here.